matter of time before these corporate companies start buying off independents.
We have not taken money from big corporations or mining lobbies.
Go look at the campaign literature and you can see it. You've got all these Labor and Liberal people, particularly Labor, they've got their names, they've got their faces, and there's this little tiny logo in the corner that says Labor Party. They know they've got a toxic brand.
What I'm saying right now is that Labor and Liberal have clearly failed the people of this country. They're more in love with their positions than people.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to a new episode of TBN, The Balanced Narrative. We appreciate you joining us today for an important conversation with our key guests. And today we have Senator Fatima Payman from Australia's Voice, Megan Krakouer, the WA representative for Australia's Voice, and Wade McDonald, who is running as an independent for the seat of Cowan. Thank you all for coming into our studio today. Before we begin, I'd like to extend my heartfelt condolences to Megan on the passing of her nephew, Andrew Krakouer. As we know, he was a very much respected AFL legend who played for Richmond and Collingwood, and he's a close relative of yours. So our thoughts are with you during this sad time. Let's get started then. Senator Fatima, as the founder of Australia's Voice and a visible Muslim woman wearing a hijab, how do you plan to combat the perception that your party represents sectarian or religious politics?
Thank you for the question and thank you for having us here. Obviously, with the various candidates we've announced, we've combated that notion, but we know that that is employed by the major parties to reduce the legitimacy of Australia's Voice, to try to pigeonhole us as a Muslim-only party or a party that only focuses on faith-based issues and only favours people of faith. Our biggest example is here, Megan Krakouer as our lead candidate here in WA, and she's doing an incredible job, not only within the advocacy space, but the grassroots movement that Megan is leading the way for many Australians here in Western Australia, but also, nationwide, where people are feeling the resemblance and understanding where Australia's voice sits.
What other common myths or misconceptions about your party do you encounter? And how will you combat these narratives in a way that resonates with everyday Australians?
I can give it to Megan in a bit, but just an overarching key policies that we're really focusing on, because again, like I said, people want to pigeonhole us into a Muslim-only party or a party that came into inception after I crossed the floor in protest of the Labour Party not doing enough on the genocide that we're continuing to see unfold in Gaza. It may have come from that and that the genocide was the catalyst for the formation of the party, but it definitely isn't the only thing that the party's been focusing on. We've been very vocal on Australia's foreign standing on human rights matters. We've been very vocal on the lack of activity and action taken by the government to relieve Australians of the cost of living pressures. The housing crisis is an absolute mess. And we're seeing these major parties make deals to benefit themselves. The biggest example was the recent resettlement allowance, where politicians who get kicked out of their seats, say, for example, our friend here, Wade, is successful in unseating Anne Ali in the seat of Cowan, and is going to get $120,000 as a resettlement allowance, plus 3 return flights paid for by taxpayers. So all the taxpayers out there, you should know that that's where your money's going. And this was a deal made by Labor and Liberals. When I presented an amendment, a motion to say we should get rid of this rort, because in a cost of living crisis, when Australians are struggling to make ends meet, to put food on the table, to pay the bills, here we are, allowing politicians who are fired from their role for not doing a good enough job representing their electorates with this fat amount of cash. And the Labour Party, the Liberal Party, and Pauline Hanson's One Nation voted against it, voted against the motion. And it's clear that they have no intention to alleviate the pressures that Australian families are facing. And so that's where Australia's voice comes in. And maybe Megan can add a few things.
For sure. Thank you for saying what you said earlier, that it's really heartfelt, and I really do appreciate it. It's an absolute pleasure to be with Fatima's team right across the country. There's some incredible people of all races, of all ethnics and all backgrounds. And the one common theme between all of us is that love, that kindness, that care for people, and basically stand strong and staunch in the truth, because too often many of our people, black, white or brown, we're not given the truth. And the Labor Party right now, and it has been for a while, has said we leave no one behind. But when you work at the coalface and you see people struggling for food, for housing, for so many other things, the cost of living pressures, people wanting to go back to work, but they can't go back to work because the childcare fees is just astronomical. And it just makes you really sad, because people need and they deserve to live their best possible lives. And that's certainly not happening. The racism, the discrimination, but more so than that, we're all brothers and sisters of the human family. So for me, it's really quite a pleasure to be with Australia's Voice. I know it's a new party, but that means that we come with incredible ideas and incredible energy. We're not just going to be tying the party line. What Fatima's allowed myself to do is be me, speak in ways that I should, be respectful, be kind, and really get the messages out in relation to how people are suffering in this lucky country which they call Australia. And we are so lucky in so many respects, in beautiful houses and beautiful beaches and so forth. But we also need to remember that there are so many sad things in terms of that's what's happening with our families and people, where they're being denied procedural fairness, where they're being denied housing, the cost of living, Centrelink. Some people that are on Centrelink, you're only getting like $500 support line. You can't even get a rental with that amount. And in terms of people that are buying their own homes, the reality is that many people will not be able to pay their homes off, their mortgages, before they leave as well. This is not the society that we should be living in. In terms of renters, like you mentioned, a person, a family of 3, 5, they can't get into a renter's home. And that's just the truth of it. $400, $500 a week. So in terms of where I want to see things, I want to see the cost of living in terms of Centrelink increased. I want people to be able to have their own homes. I want the government to be able to free more land. And if they free more land, then more homes can be built. Every single person living in this lucky country should have their own homes. And then we start going into the remote communities, and the remote communities, it's really quite hard and terrible living in so many respects, because you don't buy a part of the strawberries. It's like $15. You buy a little tin of cow pile, it can be like $15. And that's absolutely so hard with the employment and the jobs and the training. Very much not there for brothers and sisters that live in remote communities. In some of the remote communities, First Nations, for example, there's no schools. So how's a person going to be able to go into secondary school and into universities, and with the lack of those type of facilities? So that's really wrong in that sense. So joining the party was about bringing to the forefront and advocating fiercely and strongly for the fails of this government and governments that have been there before, to bring to the issues of people issues.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to you on some of those points you mentioned. Wade, let's bring yourself into this discussion. Many Australians are increasingly disillusioned with the major political parties. Why should voters consider supporting independents like yourself?
First up, thanks for the invitation to appear today. Thanks for allowing me to be with this wise panel of Senator Fatima Payman and Megan Krakouer. There is a shift happening now. The percentage who are going to of people who are going to vote independent at this election is unprecedented and is probably growing. If this election was another year away, I'd say that percentage would be even higher. Millions of Australians have figured out that the two major parties actually represent something different to their interests. And when 88% of Australians either rent or have a mortgage, there should be no debate about housing policy. It should be exactly what Megan Krakouer has just described. But in fact, we have housing policy that's geared to the multiple property owners, the investors and the rich. There should be no debate about it. There's a YouGov survey that's just come out that's had about 88% of Australians are either worse off than they were a year ago or the same. Again, there should be no debate at all. That is a national emergency. Something needs to be done. But what millions of Australians have figured out is that the major parties, in fact, don't represent them. That's why they're looking elsewhere. They're looking to other parties, independents, but not the major parties. These are two toxic brands that are being presented in this election. And you go look at the campaign literature and you can see it. You've got all these Labor and Liberal people, particularly Labor, they've got their names, they've got their faces, and there's this little tiny logo in the corner that says Labor Party. They know they've got a toxic brand. And millions of people want something different, they want something better, and they deserve something better. And look at how this narrative's been framed. The cost of living crisis. Actually, it's not a cost of living crisis, it's the cost of supporting a parasitic elite crisis.
You've hit the nail on the head there.
But it's being reframed, cost of living relief, and they're presenting, the major parties are presenting themselves, we'll fix this, we'll fix that for you. Actually, they won't, because they won't confront the root cause of this problem, which is it goes right to the heart of the Australian economy. It goes to supporting those at the top who are doing really, really well. Profits are this way, wages are like this.
Yeah.
And that's what this crisis is all about. And it can change, and it will change. Millions of Australians want that change and are intending to vote that way at this election.
Thank you. What unique advantages do independents bring to the table, especially in terms of the balance of power, being potential, kingmakers in Parliament? Maybe our average person from our audience would like to understand this aspect.
95% of the time, Labor and Liberal agree on the legislation. So it just sails through. Fatima, Payman just gave an example with this rort, but it went through with the campaign, the election funding. Labor and Liberal agree. So 95% of the time, the major parties agree. So balance of power sits there for that little residual. But I think the point is with new parties that are forming and with independents, they're not taking the corporate money. So then when they're voting or not voting for something, they don't have those corporate interests at heart when they do. So that's what makes it different. That's what millions of Australians want to see is a vote that's independent of or separate to this corporate money that's in politics.
That's a fair point. Until when will the time be that it could be just a matter of time before these corporate companies start buying off independents? Is that something we should fear also? Is that a possibility?
Again, it comes down to Wade's point of the integrity that independents and minor parties operate based on. And when we talk about transparency, it's not just a word that's thrown around. What are mechanisms put in place to ensure that there is that independence, in its purest form? We've also experienced it. We've been a grassroots movement where we have not taken money from big corporations or mining lobbies, and because for us, it's important to have that authenticity. It's important for us to have that independence, and ensure that whether, there are independents in the lower house who, like you said earlier, could potentially hold the balance of power as we're looking down the barrel of a hung parliament. I mean, polls are projecting it. Labor's not going to win a majority. And people are waking up to the reality of the two major party duopoly who are only doing what's in their interest, and their policies are becoming so similar. We call them two sides of the same coin, right? The only difference is their colors. But Labor is trying so hard to have very minimal policy distinction between them and Liberals, because they can't combat the Liberals' negative messaging, and the negative campaign. So for the major parties, while they're trying to placate one another, Australians are left with options where it's independent. So wherever I go, I say support your independent candidates in the lower house and then support us in the upper house. Because that way we can actually keep an eye on the government of the day, whether it's through forming a minority government in the lower house, or whether it's making sure that they don't do shady deals underneath the table when it comes to Senate procedures and bills that come to us. So it's a real opportunity for every Australian out there to now utilize that vote on 3rd of May to make a real difference and shake up our political system.
Independent candidates often struggle with isolation. Do you plan to forge alliances with other independents? Something along those lines?
Well, it's just policy based. This is the difference. I've obviously seen Fatima Payman in the news a lot in the last year. I've heard Megan speak. I have the greatest respect for them, and I can see where their policy's coming from. So if the policy's there, and this is really what politics should be about. It should be about policy and what people stand for. It's an ethos. So of course, with the right people, but it's not an opportunistic thing. It's not about doing deals. It's about principles, about policies. I've just heard some housing policy from Australia's Voice. I'd have to say I support exactly what I've heard from my good friends in Australia's Voice.
Great. Megan, as an Indigenous woman, what motivated you to join Australia's Voice? You might have touched on it before. How do you see your role in advocating for both Indigenous and broader community issues within the party?
On the outset, I am a proud First Nations person, but I also am a sister of the human family. And there are big issues that's impacting on all of us. Of course, I love my family, of course, I love my community, and that's what I've been brought up with. But over the years, I've actually extended out to non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, and some of my best friends are non-Indigenous people. The reality is that people aren't living their best lives. And when you see it, you hear it, you feel it, it's incumbent upon yourself to do something about it and to raise these voices and raise it in such a way with this media and very much to highlight the deficits, because without highlighting the deficits, and this is about having babies, without highlighting the deficit, nothing gets fixed. And I've mentioned earlier in part in terms of people being left behind, which Labor says, we leave no one behind. Well, in fact, that's not the case. I've spoken to many brothers and sisters, not just our First Nations brothers and sisters, that say that in terms of the way that they live right now, they can't get a house. They're waiting 5 years for a house. They're waiting 10 years for a house. Yeah, some of our other brothers and sisters say, we want to go back and work. But in the social housing that we have right now, we have to pay 25%. All we get is, all we're left with is like $20, $100 for the fortnight, yet 5 children. So this is not just about me being a proud First Nations person. It's about me being a proud person of the human family, and the hate suffering, the hate, the despair, and to challenge the systems that's to seek out to hurt and destroy people.
Yeah, thank you for that. You may know, Megan, that the Muslim community has a long historical relationship with the First Nation Australians, dating back to the early 1900s or even 1860s onwards. The Afghan Cameliers, many of whom were Muslim, they played a crucial role in developing Australia and connecting the remote areas. So many of them integrated with the First Nation communities through marriage. Given this shared history, what common issues do we have that are important to both our communities?
The one thing that comes to mind is genocidal practices that must end. First Nations people in Western Australia, very much across the country, there's been genocidal practices that have been imposed and inflicted upon us, which has led to death. Unfair living, the discrimination and racism. What? Because we've got the brown skin? That's unacceptable. So in terms of the commonalities, we share that deep belief that love and kindness and respect, and basically ensuring that our cultural practices and protocols are very much followed and respected. With that, with that shared and common knowledge and understanding of each other, it's about bringing the truth to light. It's about having beautiful values, that integrity, that kindness, that love, and being gentle in so many respects. But at the same time, if something's not right, and particularly in the political realm, you must stand up and fight and speak your truth, so we can end the suffering, so where people do suffer in silence, where we can end the discrimination and the racism to bring about really strong policies, because that hurts. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Wade, while we're on that topic about speaking up for the truth, do you see a lot of the way the hate speech laws have been rushed recently with this supposed anti-Semitic problem that we had in our community, which turned out to be a lot of it was just foreign actors manipulating petty criminals in our country. But as a result of that, we find that there's restrictions in our freedom to criticize certain countries. In universities, some universities have taken the definition of anti-Semitism, which doesn't allow us to criticize the policies of the State of Israel. Do you have anything to say about this?
Well, I think for millions of Australians, Benjamin Netanyahu is a bloodthirsty, genocidal murderer. And it's not anti-Semitic to say it. It's not anti-Semitic to criticise Israel. But the fact that the government has chosen to ignore the reality of what's happening out there and just ram through legislation just proves that they are so weak on the question of genocide. And this is the period we're in now. Since 7 October, millions of people around the world, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, are now seeing Israel for what it is, a colonial settler project, and the Palestinians as being in the way of that colonial settler project, the logic of which is genocide. It's being seen in those eyes. In this country, millions of people who didn't know anything about the issue before 7 October now do. And the government is weak on it. They're up to their eyeballs in supporting Israel. They're involved in this genocide. And when you really run through what's happening in Palestine, with the genocide unfolding there, you start to see more the parallels of what's happened here. And you're on that sort of terrain. Well, actually, it sounds similar. Not identical, but similar, with the same genocidal logic behind it. And the government fears that. It fears that consciousness emerging and becoming more and more widespread. So what do? They ram in some laws to try and say it's anti-Semitic to criticise Israel. The International Court of Justice criticised Israel. The International Criminal Court has criticised Israel. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, every law professor in the world, and the UN officials themselves. It's not anti-Semitic to criticise Israel, and that's exactly what we're going to keep doing. And that is going to edge over to more and more criticism of what's happened here and the injustices that are still occurring. So I think we just need to be bold. We need to push our narrative really, really hard now, because this is what Labor and Liberal are trying to do. They're trying to sweep this dirty history under the carpet, and we're not going to let them do it.
Yeah.
Can I just add on that as a reflection? Australia's Voice with Lydia Thorpe have co-sponsored the Genocide Red Lines package bill. And that's to ensure that as Australia, we uphold our international humanitarian obligations. We ensure that there's transparency in terms of where our taxpayer dollars are going and which genocide is funding, and that shouldn't stop. As in, we should never have to be in a position where we're having this debate, whether it's a genocide, whether it's not. Should we be sending arms and ammunition? Should we not? Like, as a signatory of the Geneva Convention, Australia plays an important role in our region. And speaking of consciences, it's remarkable that not only are they trying to, through the hate crimes bill and imposing the new definition of anti-Semitism, not only are they trying to silence the students who were the conscience of our nation, who are protesting, who are camping outside on university grounds, but also then through the social media ban. Because obviously the Israeli or the Zionist propaganda machine was broken through social media. Everyone was sharing what was happening. We were seeing the genocide live streamed on our phones, and there was no doubt about what's happening and what the realities on the ground were. So, the many people, many Australians out there can see right through the intentions behind the major parties making these shady deals and wanting to silence us, because it's bizarre that a student at university can criticize Anthony Albanese and not be penalized, but the moment you criticize Benjamin Netanyahu, you're called an anti-Semite. How does that work?
It's astounding. Yeah, I think on this matter, you have the majority of the world on one side, and you have US and a few of their allies on the other side. But living in the West with the mainstream media, you sort of like don't hear the other side much. And that's why there's still a lot of work to be done to raise awareness about what's happening. Let's talk about the cost of living crisis, if you don't mind. I'm sure many of you know that while Australians are struggling, we are actually the world's leading exporter of liquefied natural gas, surpassing even major producers like Qatar. Now, did you know the citizens of Qatar, they pay absolutely no tax, 0% income tax. They enjoy a range of incredible government benefits, free high-quality healthcare and education, including upper education. They have access to housing subsidies. Meanwhile, here in Australia, we're exporting record amounts of our own natural resources, yet families and businesses are being squeezed. In fact, reports show major gas companies like Santos are receiving massive tax cuts, tax breaks and subsidies, while paying either little or no tax at all on the profits from our resources. So how have both the major parties let this perceived exploitation go on for so long? These massive mining and gas corporations are essentially plundering our natural wealth and raking in billions of dollars in profits while paying little to no tax. What do independents like yourselves, what do you intend to do about this?
So through Australia's Voice, we've got a petition as we speak. There's a petition to protect our resources, to prioritize Australians utilizing that gas for domestic purposes so that there isn't a supply shortage. Being the world's leading gas exporter, the fact that we've got this problem, we're trying to shift the narrative. And my colleague, Senator David Pocock, and a few other crossbenchers actually had a press conference recently. And what we're trying to push is that we do not have a gas supply problem. We have a gas export problem.
Let's have a look about what you're saying.
Standing here today, calling on the government to ensure that uncontracted gas is offered to Australian businesses, households first. We have to ensure that Australian gas is actually benefiting Australians before we export it. We have 10 times the amount of gas that is uncontracted as what is projected as the shortfall. This is a problem that can be solved. What we haven't seen is the political will from the major parties to actually say Australians should benefit from Australian gas first before we export it.
So through this petition, we are wanting to reshift the way people look at the gas problem. We know that we need more renewable energy sources. We need cleaner energy, cheaper energy for Australians to be able to utilize. And why do we have to put profits over people? Because that's what the major parties have been doing. They've been prioritizing the benefits of selling all that and exporting all that gas rather than reserving it for domestic use and prioritizing Australians' needs.
Peter Dutton claims his gas reservation policy will help lower energy costs for Australians. But isn't that just tinkering around the edges? When the real issue is that these massive mining and gas corporations are essentially, plundering our natural resources and leaving everyday Australians to suffer through a crippling cost of living crisis. It's outrageous that countries like Qatar, which export less gas than us, can provide their citizens with generous welfare benefits while we're drowning in a cost of living crisis. When Australians see politicians cozying up to mining magnates, having lunch together, or even going so far as to request the use of their own private jets, to fly to destinations like Bali, it does little to inspire confidence in the integrity of our democratic process. It gives us the impression that our politicians can be bought by these mining corporations. What do you have to say about that, Wade?
I think that's part of the emerging consciousness now, that millions of people are seeing that these major parties don't represent them. They represent something else. And the looting of the gas, the looting of the minerals, guaranteed there are some companies that are getting rich over it. And that's what Labor and Liberal are facilitating. And frankly, I think Labor and Liberal find these elections embarrassing. Every 3 years, they have to go to the millions of people that they've not represented and somehow convince them to just turn up at the ballot paper or the ballot box and vote for the red one or the blue one. But things won't change. And what Dutton's doing now, he's scrambling about to try and find a policy. It's all being made up on the run. They just want this election over and done with so they can get back to their real business, which is keeping the corporate rich. And the looting is planned to continue. It's astounding. There's a consciousness emerging. Millions of people are actually thinking, well, hang on, I don't have to vote for this stuff anymore.
Correct. And this happened in the Liberal government also, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It was
Labor. Well, Labor will admit, the housing crisis has been decades in the making. Well, you had the Rudd-Gillard years during those decades. You were part of the problem. You allowed this to happen, where now housing is concentrated. Ownership of housing is concentrated into the few who own more than one property. 88% of Australians either own one or zero properties. 12% own all the rest, multiple properties, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 100 properties. It's madness. But they've cultivated this economic environment. They're cultivated. That's what they're ruling for. Is the interests of that.
The elite. Yeah. And there are solutions to this. We have enough resources to deal with the problems that you talked about. Everyone, having wanting to own a house, and healthcare improvements, welfare improvements. We've got the solution. We've got the resources. It's just a matter of how can we restructure the whole system.
So I think, just quickly, I think sometimes people are more in love with power than in love with people. They want to hold that. They want to. The government right now, they've proven themselves not to be truly representative of all the constituents in this country. And that's a reality, because they are in love with positions. They are in love with their power. They love being able to speak to the media and make decisions on behalf of the people without the people. And this is actually really not a strong democracy in that sense, because even when you're going into this particular election, where you've got the Labor, you've got Liberals, you've got Greens, you've got Nationals, and they have, money for big campaigns and so forth, whereas the smaller parties and the independents is very limited. So there's a huge power imbalance. It's almost like there's this might that is right.
Yep.
But what I'm saying right now is that Labor and Liberal have clearly failed the people of this country. The lies that are being spoken to. We won't see lies being told before too long. It'll be cluster buys. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So people are very much in the government. They're more in love with their positions than people. And that's a really sad reality.
Yep.
And the reality is that as part of life, there is something terrible called death. When you're in positions of influence and power, and being able to have the ability to negotiate and arbitrate and be at the same table, what is more important than human beings, helping them live their best lives? And we need to actually tip it on its head. And so to the voters, this election, and I seen several days ago where they said that there'll be over 70,000 more people going to vote at this election. That's how critical it is. That's how important it is. So this is where the independents and the smaller parties are absolutely critical. It is critical because it's critical for human life.
Thank you.
I think Megan and Wade covered everything very succinctly and accurately. So
Can we get the independents to bring this to the surface more, to speak about it more, so that the major parties have to do something?
the pressure is on the major parties. I think just the way we see the Coles and Woolies duopoly, we're starting to see Labor and Liberals duopoly, and the duopoly actually thrives on people being disengaged and not tuning into politics. But now with independents and minor parties activating those spaces, the major parties are afraid. They're really scared that they're losing ground. I've had firsthand experience when I was in the Labor Party telling them we're bleeding votes. People are turning their backs on us. We need to do something. And I was told, well, we won't let the community blackmail us. We won't let the community blackmail us. And we know that they'll forgive and forget. Right? We're starting to see the pork barreling happen around the country, 5 million here, 10 million there, just to buy those votes back.
Sure.
But I think, as Megan and Wade explicitly mentioned, people are waking up. They are no longer falling for the lies that we were hearing from the major parties. And I mean, I'm quite proud of the brothers in Melbourne who basically shooed the Liberal candidates away from the mosque. Like, the audacity to come to a mosque on an Eid prayer morning, where people are there to celebrate Eid, and you're there, defending Peter Dutton and how he's going to bring the war criminal and genocidal so-called leader or ally, Netanyahu, he's going to welcome him with open arms. Like, that's the type of person you're backing in and representing. So for those Liberal candidates and MP to enter that space, it was horrendous, but rightfully so. The community was up in arms. They were like, how dare they enter our sacred space and then lecture us on human rights and generosity and giving you $6 million worth to build a mosque. Like, excuse me, do you really value us? So yeah, it's been remarkable to just see how the campaign has been unfolding, and I know that a stronger crossbench equals a stronger democracy.
Senator Fatima Payman, Wade McDonald, and Megan Krakouer, it was a pleasure having all three of you on today, and we hope to have you on in the future. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in again. Remember to support independent media so we can get the truth out. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.